Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Principles Made Practical podcast. We are very lucky today to have Suzanne Munson with us, who's written a number of books. And one of the most intriguing to me is a metaphysical outlook on Thomas Jefferson. And her insights into metaphysics and politics have just fascinated me, and I imagine will fascinate you as well. So without further ado, welcome, Suzanne. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. If you don't mind, if you could start out by giving us a little background on you and how you came to engage in this area and what you're up to.
Okay. Well, I guess it all started with two things. My retirement from the so-called working world, although I have been working since then on my writing, and the death of my husband about 10 years ago. So I was on a parallel journey at the time. After I retired, I realized that I could write a book that I'd had in my head for a good while, and that was a biography of Thomas Jefferson's great teacher, George Wythe, called Jefferson's Godfather. So that was a big project. For some reason, I couldn't concentrate at home, although I was living alone at the time. And I needed just to go away to various retreats, spiritual retreats, writing retreats. And so that book took a long time to finish. My other books have taken less time. And but at the same time, on this parallel journey, one foot in on the side of history, where what I was writing, everything had to be totally accurate, backed up by footnotes and bibliography. But I was on a spiritual journey as well. I wanted to know where my husband had gone, if he still existed in some fashion somewhere. And if I found that out, where we all go and what we do and what the point of it all was. So that spiritual journey was gradual over a period of a number of years. I would discover different avenues to explore that were not in my background growing up, my religious background as a Protestant Christian. And but I go where other people fear to tread, and I was not afraid of these things. So I took little steps one at a time. And my first step was toward learning more about the near-death experience phenomenon. And I had already seen, on the Today Show, occasionally they would have somebody who'd had this profound near-death experience. And now you're seeing it all over the place, even on Fox News, that they feature these accounts sometimes. And the Today Show and other programs like that. So, but way back then, it was still something that not everybody was aware of. So I read every book I could about the near-death experience phenomenon. And that gave me a lot of hope for the afterlife. There are certain commonalities that people have who have this experience. And one is leaving their physical form, but they're still them. You know, they said, "Oh, that's my body, but that's not me. I'm somewhere else, and I'm on my way somewhere. I don't know where, but I'm on my way." And they encounter an overwhelming sense of love, unconditional love. They're enveloped in it, as if they've finally come home. Sometimes they encounter spiritual beings, some Christians or even atheists who claim they've seen or been counseled by Jesus, but other religions just do see kind of general spiritual beings. And but the biggest thing is that they come back with an idea that, or firm belief that there is not just a God, but a loving God, or maybe they don't want to call it God. Source is is a term a lot of people use, because the term God has been abused. Creator, source, parent, all that. So that helped me a great deal. And then my next step, well, so then I started reading books that were referred to in these other books. And one was Dr. Brian Weiss, who was chairman of the psychiatric department at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami, highly credentialed person, gone to the best universities in America. And he had, and his book was a New York Times bestseller called Many Lives, Many Masters. Before then, the book that got me onto the near-death experience was also written by a medical doctor, Dr. Raymond Moody, who published his studies of the near-death experience at the University of Virginia. And since then, there have been dozens and dozens of additional studies and books by very reputable people, medical doctors, psychiatrists, PhD researchers. So that was the first step, the near-death experience. Second step was Dr. Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters. Dr. Weiss was brought up Jewish and certainly had no idea about reincarnation until he put a patient under deep hypnosis. She had multiple psychoses and dysfunctional relationships. So all these past lives kept coming up when she was in a state of great, deep relaxation. And each time a past life came up, the phobia, or a phobia in her present life that was related to that life, would be recognized and would go away. The same with dysfunctional relationships. She would recognize them, that they had come from past experiences. So that was an interesting adventure that I had, and I read everything I could about reincarnation, and that it was believed in by the early Christians and Jews and drummed out of the doctrine by men who met several hundred years after Christ and decided what it was that we were supposed to believe. And that was when power and control started coming into the church, and when it became Romanized and weaponized.
Right.
So that was reincarnation was my second step. My third step was a book by Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls. He has actually two books on that subject, the subject of what we do between lives. You know, if we reincarnate, we are in another place for a while before we come back. So what do? We don't just sit on a pink cloud and play a harp. Actually, we're quite busy and productive, but it is heaven we get to play, according to these people. And so in these books, Dr. Newton also was a skeptic. He had no idea what he was getting into till he put these people under deep hypnosis. And eventually he started regressing them in past lives back to their birth in this incarnation and what it was like before we incarnated. And so these are fascinating stories. He's done several thousand cases, and he was a busy man.
Yeah.
And so I listen to these stories sometimes at night to go to sleep because I find them very interesting. And so that was my third step into the what we would call the metaphysical. My fourth step, and this is related to my second book and maybe some future books, was meeting an amateur medium at a writer's retreat in the mountains of Virginia. And her name, she's deceased now, it's Katie Letcher Lyle. She was a poet, had written a number of books. And so those of us who had published, who were there at the writer's retreat, were asked to put our books out for others to read. So she had written a book called Friends in High Places. And that was about her friends and her encounters with the spirit world. And so I read the book. I sat on the porch overlooking the mountains and read the book. And finally I said, Katie, you appear to be a medium. Do you think you can channel my late husband? This was 6 months after he died. And she said, yeah, I probably can. She did not do that. She was not a professional medium. She had taught herself how to do this. And she told me I could do it, but I'd rather not. I'd rather have somebody else do it for me. Because I probably wouldn't be that good at it. But so she went, and we were suite mates. We shared a bathroom, and she went in her room and with a yellow notepad and asked his name, and came out a half hour later with a perfect description of him. And she'd never met him. She'd never heard me talk about him. So I thought that was very interesting. So then later I joined this group called IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science. And that was founded by astronaut Edgar Mitchell. He had an epiphany when he came back from the moon. He saw a beautiful Earth. And he realized that there was more to knowing about the universe than just the physical principles of the world, gravity and all those things. Bunch of rocks floating around in space with no purpose. And so his intent was to marry or to merge spirituality with science, to have science prove certain spiritual principles. And everything the IONS group does is based on research. They're careful with what they do, but they have they're out of the box thinkers, you could say. So one of the speakers at the IONS group was a writer who had written a book about a medium, and this writer was skeptical of mediumship, but she'd heard about a medium, and so she decided to give it a try and asked to speak to her late mother and several friends who had died. So she wrote a book called Conversations with Jerry, and others I thought were dead. And there's a chapter on each one of them. And at the end, the author, Irene Kindig, became a believer. And she said there was no way that this medium who didn't know these people could come forth with their actual personalities, what they would say, and some astounding revelations that would only be true of these people. So I thought, well, if that medium is good enough for her, maybe I'll give her a try. So I timidly, I went on her website. Her name, the medium's name is Jana Anna. She lives in Indiana. I live in Virginia. And so I made an appointment with her. I make an appointment usually a week in advance. And the interviews are held by phone. They are recorded. They begin precisely on the hour and end precisely on the hour. And then a recording is sent a few minutes later. So I felt that I had brought my late husband in, or she had for me. And there was no way, little expressions that he had and a lot of advice about what was going on in their family. And so later on, I asked to speak to my parents and a deceased friend and some other people and all that. And then I had invited a friend of mine, and I had lost a dear friend that we had. There were three of us and we were very close. So I said to my friend Debbie, I said, come over here, we're going to dial up Phoebe, who had departed a few months earlier. So she came over and we closed the door, and I told the medium that we would like to speak to Phoebe. And so Debbie and I were pretty convinced that she had come through because she talked about her children and some very specific things. But then the medium interrupted, and she didn't really interrupt, but she said, Debbie, she said, do you have a brother? And Debbie said, yes. And she said, your brother needs you. And so Debbie pondered that for a while, and then she got in her car and forgot about it. Then she gets a telephone call from her brother in another state. Her brother says, Debbie, I need you. And it turned out he had a very ill daughter and needed Debbie's help with that. So now Debbie and I, we're the crazy ones when we meet with a group of girls and we tell about our experiences with the medium. And I've had other friends over who were too timid to do this on their own, but they'll do it with me. And so I'll get things started and then I will leave them. If I have one friend who had a difficult relationship with her father and she had some unfinished business. So I got her started and then I left, closed the door and let her have her time. And she didn't say much at the end, except that she felt they had connected and it was very helpful. So, so those are my little adventures that led to my second book, which is called The Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson. That's available on Amazon. And it premiered as the #1 new read in political commentary. And so I thought, well, if I can access regular people, why not somebody famous? Are famous people too busy or too important, to talk to me? So I'd already written about Thomas Jefferson. I felt that I knew a lot about the first part of his life was what I wrote about. And I had a lot of questions that I wanted to ask him. I had always been fascinated by Jefferson. Those of us who grew up in Virginia at a certain time always had a great respect for what he did for getting the country off to a good start. And Declaration of Independence, religious freedom law, founding the University of Virginia, all those things. And I used to have a fantasy of getting him from wherever he was in his 1826, he died in 1826, sort of resurrecting him and dusting him off and putting him in my car and driving him around University of Virginia. And but I would be the one telling him what was going on. I'd be the driver and I'd be in charge. And so I'd say, now look around here, look at the women here, look at the people of color, look at the people from Japan, isn't this something? Could you have ever imagined that? Anyways, it turned out I did ask the medium to access Thomas Jefferson. He said, I've been expecting this, or the entity that came through said that. And I asked his permission. I said, would you be interested in cooperating with me on a project so that you could comment on America's current government and institutions? And to prepare for this, I went on Amazon and I found 8 authors who were still living who had written books about Thomas Jefferson. And I found their emails. And I told them, I didn't tell them what I was really doing, or they would never have responded to me. But I said I was working on a class project. And if you could talk to Thomas Jefferson, what questions would you ask? And do you have any questions you'd like to contribute? So they contributed some really good questions, some that I would not have thought of. And I added those to the conversation. And I had 8 sessions, 1-hour sessions with an entity who was presenting as Thomas Jefferson. So there are only 3 ways of looking at that book. The first is I wrote it. I have the recordings to prove that I'm asking the questions. I'm not giving the answers. Secondly, the medium made it all up. Well, the medium majored in elementary education, did not like history, knew very little about Thomas Jefferson, didn't know anything about his personal life with his slave mistress and stuff like that. And then the third option is we are hearing from some entity on the other side who's claiming to be Thomas Jefferson. And so I say in the beginning of the book, you decide, the reader should decide. If you can't accept the mediumship part of this, read it anyway, because the observations are very important and very profound. I wish I had written them, but I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So the mystical aspects of life in general, right, are really profound to understand, because a lot of what the founding fathers did was inspired. And one of the things that I found about information and inspiration is that when it comes spontaneously from a centered, balanced state, pretty much accurate, and I think that and I always encourage people to do what you did, which is to, make up your own mind about it. But one of the things that I found is that people believe some of what they hear, more of what they see, but they believe everything that they experience. And that when people listen to you and a lot of this type of communication, I know just me sitting here, I'm having a physical experience. I'm resonating with it. I'm got, goosebumps, and I'm going, and my head's bobbing and stuff. And so I'm having a physical, visceral reaction, which I've learned to trust in is the thoughts that are associated with that feeling have always proven out to be accurate throughout my whole life, with no exceptions. I mean, more consistent than anything else at all for me. So I would, just kind of add that to, as a listener to what you're sharing, that, it has the ring of truth to me.
Right. Well, we do need to trust our intuitions. Generally, our first thoughts are our best thoughts. And I think we all have a truthometer. And when I can't sleep at night, I listen to at least one near-death experience account. And these people aren't making this up, They had a bona fide spiritual experience and bona fide out-of-body experience. And some of these people were atheists, agnostics, didn't even think about religion. Some of them were Catholics, Baptists, who were brought up in a judgmental religion and realized that that was not the right slant that we should have about our Creator. And one thing that I like about the near-death experience is the life review. Almost all, not every experiencer has this, but most of them have a life review. And the old expression, I almost died, my life passed in front of me. Well, there's a reason for that. Whoever came up with that had a near-death experience.
Of course.
And so there is judgment at after each life, but not the kind of judgment that a lot of these churches like to talk about and scare people with. It's all about power, scaring people and keeping them in the fold. According to these thousands of near-death experiencers, the life review is like a panorama. It's like a 360-degree screen where you were shown every single thing in your life, but instantaneously. Now, I don't get how that happens, but that's what they say, even back to childhood. And so one of them said that he went back, he was shown how he had behaved on a playground, how he had bullied a child. And he was shown how that child felt, how hurt he was physically and psychologically. And so we're not shown that we gave $20 million to the art museum or some charity if our heart wasn't really in it, if we're just doing it for egotistical reasons to have our name on a wall. We're not shown that we were president of this, that, and the other. We are shown only how our lives affected other lives. Were you kind? Were you generous? Or were you judgmental? Did you hurt people? with your thoughts, your actions, your words, either on purpose or just inadvertently. And so somehow in this flash, time is very different on the other side. I don't really understand it, but we are, our linear way of thinking, of living our lives is not the way it is on the other side. And so the judging is not harsh. It's not punishing. It's very kind. What would you have done differently in this case? Can't you see how this person felt after you said that? Either better or worse. And, but very kind. It's, like a kindly teacher pointing out what you need to do. And then the people come back, the near-death experiencers come back. They don't want to come back. Nobody ever wants to come back to this planet. This is called the hardest planet to live on, because it's a school. We're in school here. It's kindergarten, really, learning to be better souls with each incarnation. So most of these people are transformed. They come back as different people. They have different values, and they trying to learn to live a good life, a life of kindness and goodness of spirit, helpfulness to others. Some come back and they want to help the environment all of a sudden. They didn't before. Or they want to run some kind of charity or just be a better person, go back to the routine, but just be a better person.
Yeah, I've had in my meditation a lot of insights about time. And time is, at least in my view, time is something that we construct with our mind. I mean, Einstein used to, give the example of like, well, time with a beautiful woman, hours pass in a moment, and time when I touch a hot stove, like a second is like forever, and it's to kind of help people have kind of a sense of the variability of time and how we create the idea of time. And it's
Right.
and
Well,
so,
Einstein, I wouldn't say he had a near-death experience, but he had something similar to it. He and Edgar Cayce, who was a great healer and a great prophet of the 20th century, and some others, had the ability to, I would say, meditate themselves into a kind of a trance, so that they wouldn't necessarily call it an out-of-body experience, but an out of our routine mentality reality. And so they would go to a higher plane of thinking. Some people call it the Akashic records, where all knowledge of the universe is held or is revealed, is available. So they would go to that higher plane, much higher than our little minds contain. And Einstein would access the principles of the universe that way. And Edgar Cayce would access his healing methodology that way. And clairvoyance, he's predicted many, many events that have taken place. So we are very limited here in our little daily lives, our little niggling thinking about politics and grocery store and resentment, all that. So it's important to elevate our thinking and to kind of get on a different beam, a more spiritual beam.
one of my areas of interest that I'm delving into, I guess, is how the impact that any given individual can have in the world. And one of the books I wrote is The Dynamics of Global Leadership. And the essence of the book is that the impact we have is the degree to which we can resonate that light in other people, for lack of another word, or truth. Or when I was talking before about I'm having a physical, visceral response to the words you're saying that is verifying that the degree to which we can create that resonance in other people.
Right.
And I'm really working on sort of my thought is the more honest and accepting I am of who I am as a soul, the more enhanced my ability will be to resonate that experience within people where they go, yeah, and it's all about me being honest and accepting of myself and being willing to let old understandings of who I am give way to understandings that seem to be more accurate and more deeply rooted.
Right. Well, my first book, called Jefferson's Godfather, and this is the biography of Jefferson's wonderful teacher, George Wythe, is all about the power of one individual to change history for the better or the worse. And we all know who can name names of those who changed history for the worst: Hitler, Nero, Mussolini, Putin, any number of individuals. But the list is shorter of those who changed it for the better. I mean, decidedly changed it for the better, because history doesn't honor those individuals, and sometimes they fade into oblivion over time. And that was true of the man I wrote about, George Wythe. He was a giant. He was one of the most admired founding fathers. But if you were asked to name founding fathers today, you wouldn't name him, but he was. He signed the Declaration of Independence. He championed the Constitution. He co-authored America's first religious freedom law with his student, Thomas Jefferson. He taught 200 of America's first good leaders. And he influenced all 5 of our first presidents, either directly or indirectly. He was universally admired for ethics, his honesty, and his sense of patriotism and statesmanship. So he had an enormous influence on getting this country off to the right start by educating so many of its early, not just statesmen, not just people in Congress and presidents, but judges. He influenced Chief Justice John Marshall, who was one of the most consequential of all of our Supreme Court justices. And George Wythe was renowned for his honesty. And a contemporary of his said, a clergyman said, George Wythe is the only honest lawyer I ever met. And maybe he was honest to the extreme. He wouldn't accept as a client somebody who was a liar and a cheat. But if they'd made a mistake and they were sorry for it, he might represent them. But he preferred representing honorable people. And also, as a judge, he was offered some big bribes, gifts that he returned. And he taught his students. He taught 200 law students. He was America's first professor of law and only professor for a number of years in America, professor of law.
Wow.
He taught his law students that it would be better to cut off their hand than to put it in the public till for personal gain. And there was a big financial scandal, and I think it was the 1750s in Virginia, where some of the leading plantation owners who were also in the legislature had helped themselves to some public money under the table. And he was one of the few who was not involved in that. So afterwards, the legislature made him like an auditor of the Treasury once or twice a year, because he was renowned for his honesty. But he set a sterling example for everybody around him. And he's an example of the power of one individual for great good. And I think another example is Gandhi, who was able to influence politics, world affairs through his humility. You know, he wasn't a general running around with medals all over his chest,
Yeah.
waving guns at the British. He was dressed in a loincloth, and he told the truth, and he embarrassed the British before world opinion.
Well, and I would also say that he educated the British, because the one of the things that I believe is true is that nobody sustainably benefits at the expense of another. And so the whole idea of colonization was basically exploitive.
Right.
And I think Gandhi was able to help the British understand that not only were the colonies suffering from being exploited, but Great Britain itself was being impacted negatively by exploiting. And so then they set upon, a course of divesting themselves of their colonies.
Right. Well, ideally, situations are supposed to be win-win,
Absolutely. Well, and if you subscribe to, I wrote a book. The last book I wrote is entitled Being One. And the concept is, if we're all one, everything is either win-win or win-lose, because we're all one and we all rise and fall together.
Correct.
So the idea that that there's zero sum is a viable way of looking at things is false. I always like to give examples of, in basketball, when there was like the finals and Kobe Bryant was going and stuff, he'd be all excited and not nervous about it. He'd be all excited because he said, look, we're going to be able to bring out the best in each other. And so we're all going to end up, he didn't say it in these words, but what I heard was, we're all going to end up being winners because we're all going to bring out the best we have at a higher level than ever before in this game.
Right.
And I couldn't do it without you as an opponent, and you couldn't do it without me. So we're engaged together. And I play a lot of tennis, and it's the same thing. You can't have a great tennis match that isn't, close and even and competitive.
That's right. Well, that's another thing that the near-death experiencers experience. The unity, our unity, our soul connections, that we are, we judge each other, we criticize each other, we hate each other, we kill each other, we cheat, we do all these things. In our divisiveness, it's, me against the world, whatever. But they are shown that we are beautiful souls, huge. If you could see your soul, it's huge. And we're so much greater than the way we present ourselves here. And here we just act like kids in kindergarten, but on the other side, we understand that we were all part of the whole, that we are all together in a very spiritual way, in a very real way. And eventually, if we are good enough people, good enough souls, eventually we will join the united soul.
Right. So I have a I don't know, a question, a thought, something. It's occurred to me in my meditation that the only power that ever satisfies our need for power is power over ourselves. And once we have power over ourselves, we no longer wish to have power over other people, because that need to experience power has been satisfied.
Yes.
So my question is like, one of the things that I think about is like, well, is there any way possible to communicate that to Putin and various members of Congress and people that are in leadership positions politically, to see if it could be communicated to them to where they could understand that?
Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of immature people in Washington right now. Now, Michael Newton would call them young souls, level 1 souls, level 5 being the most elevated, most spiritual, most mature. And they are full of ego. And, you know, we can name a few who prance around and throw bombshells out every now and then just to get their face on the news. And I don't know what it would take to change some of those individuals. Now, we've got two people running for president who are too old to run, much less all the other baggage they have. And it's sheer ego, you know, that's causing them to run. And somebody needs to, I know it's probably too late, but, you know, let's think about the people and not about self so much.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's
But I don't know how you would get to some of these people in Congress unless the spiritual advisor were to talk to them and just say, hey, you're showing so much ego, you know, can you just back off a little bit and get some work done for the people?
well, I'll tell you what my thought is, and so far it hasn't gone anywhere. But my thought is that, and I've seen this, is that if people can be communicated to with enough love and acceptance and care, that they'll be willing to rethink some of their assumptions and change some of their thinking. You know, I wrote a book. One of the books I wrote is My Life with Angels, and one of the parts of the book that I really enjoyed writing is that when I receive information from my angels in meditation, it's imbued with so much love that I'm not even capable of questioning it. It's like
Right.
anything that's imbued with that much love and warmth and clarity, you know, I'm in. You know?
Right.
And even if it's an idea that I haven't had before, I'm adopting that idea because I want to have as much of that experience as I can. And so if the thoughts and those experiences are match set, then I want to accept the whole match set. And so I take a look at my experience and I say, well, you know, if I could share with other people the way my angels share with me, maybe they would become more flexible in opening their minds to a better way.
Right. Well, that's the wonderful thing about the internet. The internet is like the printing press. You know, you got good stuff coming off the press and you got a lot of terrible stuff as well. But for me, the internet has really helped my spiritual development because I hear people like you who are on a spiritual path. You know, I have a truthometer, you know, if it doesn't sound right, I'm not going to listen to somebody. But if it sounds right, I will listen. And the YouTube, I'm on YouTube all the time, listening to spiritual talks and people who are pushing the envelope, not just traditional, you know, Christian stuff, but more or less, more along the lines of people who are pushing the envelope in the spiritual world. And Dolores Cannon, I don't know whether you've followed her or not, but there are a number of people like that. And yeah, so yeah, you're telling your story, you're trying to reach people. You're one of the light givers. I would like to be a light giver in my own way through my books and maybe some talks.
Well, I think you are. I mean, one of the things that I always tell people is that your story is important because there are people that will hear it when you say it that won't hear it if I say it or anybody else says it. The only person they're going to hear it from is you. And so so your story is really important because it's going to reach people that nobody else can reach.
Right.
So, you know, you're doing it.
And then the thing about self-acceptance is very important, as you know. Now I have friends in AA and I go to AA meetings with them. And one of the things they say in AA is, we will love you until you learn to love yourself. A lot of people with drug and alcohol problems basically hate themselves and hate the world. And, you know, and a lot of them have been abused or they've been hurt along the way and they feel they drown their sorrows,
Right.
or numb their sorrows. And so AA is very loving. It's very spiritual. And it's the best hour anybody can spend, in my opinion. And there's Richard Rohr, who's a wonderful Catholic priest, who's a spiritual leader. He's upending a lot of traditional Catholic beliefs. They're having a hard time with him, but he always goes back to he always says, no, it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. Here it is. I think they want to drum him out of the Corps because he's not about judgment and harshness and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's Franciscan, so he is very much about love, gentleness, generosity. But anyway, so he says, Richard Rohr's Father Rohr says, he goes down into AA meetings are held in usually here in Richmond, they're in the basements of churches and a lot of other places. And so he says there's more spirituality in the basement of the church than upstairs, because the people have learned to rely on a higher power and have a relationship with a higher power as part of their recovery. And also there's great honesty in their sharing. You will never find a more honest meeting than an AA meeting. People spill their guts in there to total strangers, and it's a good form of therapy. Yeah, and they laugh about their foibles, all the crazy things they did, drinking and drugging. It's funny after a while.
Yeah, one of the books I wrote is Empathetic Healing, and what I learned from writing that book is that the essence of all healing is acceptance, and most of all acceptance of ourselves. You alluded to it earlier that who we really are is like much more vast and powerful than when we think of ourselves as just this body or something, and it's
right.
Far beyond that. And I've done some work in self-esteem, and that to me, feeling good about myself is about accepting the magnificence that I am. And I'm no more magnificent than you or anybody else. We're all magnificent, right? But I've made lots of money, and I've closed lots of deals, and I've done all that stuff. And the only thing that really made a difference in my self-esteem was accepting more of the fact that as this, big soul, that I have tremendous access to wisdom and power and insight, and that has helped me boost my self-esteem where commercial success didn't.
Right. Well, I found that is in another book that I've written, or I can't say written, I've completed with Departed Soul, but it's not published yet. I exercise by dancing to music. That's how I like to exercise.
Nice.
So I had a barefoot on carpet, that's better. And so I was listening to a beautiful harp rendition of Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. And I wondered if Leonard had anything to say to us. So I asked the medium to call him up. And this goes back to self-acceptance, self-love. And I started, I printed maybe 30 or 40 of his most famous songs and poems. And in every single one of them, the lyrics were dark. Was the relationship that had gone bad, regrets about something, the world is going to hell. And I thought, well, why? Was that just his shtick? Or did he really feel that way? And if he did, why? So an entity who said he was Leonard Cohen and I had some conversations. And I have completed a book about that. At least I think I've completed it. But he said, and one of the things that I do when I contact these famous people is I asked, what was it like to die? And so he said, the entity said, yeah, when I left my body, I looked back on that miserable carcass. And he said, of course, his expressions were totally different from what came through with Jefferson. Jefferson was all about government and institutions, and it was very formal. Whereas Leonard came through as, we were just like two people having a drink.
Yeah.
And so, he said, yeah, I look back on that miserable carcass and I said, why in the hell didn't I take better care of myself? He said, I really abused my body. And then I asked him about all of his dark lyrics. And I asked him about love, because on the other side, we're supposed to encounter love, and such as we've not known in this dimension. And so he said, yeah, that they were dark. Said part of it was his shtick. But a lot of it was the way he felt. And that his father had died when Leonard was young, and his mother was crazy, he said, and could not give him the love that he craved. And so as a result, he never had a successful love relationship in his adult life.
Oh, that's too bad.
It was very sad. But now he realizes all that, and he's looking at that, and he even said, well, he's connecting with his mother, and he's understanding what her problems were too.
Right.
And so that was an interesting experience. I've started another one. I was in France last spring, and I went to the mental hospital where Van Gogh spent his last life and did some of his best work. And I just had a feeling that, this might be an interesting person to access.
Mm-hmm.
So I've written, I've had one session with an entity presenting as Van Gogh.
Oh,
so I don't know what will, if I live long enough, I could have a whole series of these things, because they're a lot easier to write than history with footnotes and bibliography.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
All I'm doing is transcribing. I'm not
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah,
but I have to organize it into chapters that,
Sure.
according to subject matter.
Sure. Well, that's great. I mean, that sounds like a inspiring and fascinating track to be on.
Well, I can do it in my nightgown right here at home. Don't have to go anywhere to be amused.
You know what? Thank goodness for the internet, right?
Yeah, right.
We can all get around a lot better.
Right.
Well, that's great. So let me ask a couple questions just out of curiosity. As you've gone more into this area of metaphysics and accessing information through mediums and stuff, have you noticed any physical changes or energetic changes? What changes have you noticed in yourself as you've become more accepting and aligned with all of this?
I try to live a very balanced life. I try to eat properly, try to eat all the organic food I can find.
Right.
And I try not to drink too much tap water.
Yeah.
I drink water straight from the mountain springs in glass bottles. I am very aware, and a lot of this comes from what I've learned in AA meetings. I'm very aware of what's going on in my head at all times. And one thing that's taught by Jesus, Buddha, and others in AA is that resentments are our worst enemy. And we all go around, judging people for their politics or bad personalities or, mistakes they're making or whatever. And we all have resentments, and lots of times we feel they're justifiable. But what I've learned is that even a justifiable resentment is going to boomerang and hurt me. If you put negativity out, you'll get negativity back. If you put positive energy, positive thinking, positive actions out, they will come back and they will help you at some point in the future. So I'm very, very aware of what's in my head. If I feel a resentment coming on, I'll try to kick it out. And I try to live with a sense of gratitude. I think if you're grateful, and certainly everybody in America, even poor people, we live better than most of the people in the rest of the world. And one thing I'm grateful for is just a bathroom. Those poor people in Gaza and any refugee group, they don't even have a bathroom or pot to pee in. And I could go on about that, but just sanitary conditions, a shower, a toilet, sink. I find myself really grateful for just simple things, a roof over my head. I'm not in a tent somewhere shivering,
Yeah.
And so an attitude of gratitude is very, very important. And forgiveness, generosity. I give as generously as I can to charities here and abroad, especially those abroad, because I think a lot of Americans are, they might give to the Red Cross here, but they might not give to Doctors Without Borders. And there's really good charities that are helping the refugees. So, I try to live a good life. When I was working, I didn't have time to think too much about all that. I had family at home. I had a demanding job. I had a mother in nursing. I had a mother in diapers and a daughter in diapers.
Yeah.
I was stressed, and it was all I could do to get through the day.
Right.
Now I have peace. I have time to think. Nature's very important to me. I have a little patch of woods in the back and a little patch of woods in the front.
Nice.
Of where I live. And I'd take nature retreats. And all those things, I think, to have a more balanced, peaceful, spiritual life. I pray for people, pray for people in need. I think prayers do have, well, it's been proven scientifically that focusing particularly The Power of Eight is a book that was written about this. This woman who's a skeptic had got 8 people together to see if they could influence something physical 100 miles away. And by focusing, they changed the molecules in a glass of water.
Wow.
And they also, she felt that they had helped heal somebody too that way by focusing positive healing energy. Our thoughts don't remain in our heads. That's one thing we have to learn.
Right.
We're either putting positive energy out or negative energy out, or maybe neutral, maybe nothing. But thoughts have power.
Indeed.
They're out there in the universe, and we're either contributing to the universe or we're detracting from the goodness of the universe with our thoughts and our actions.
Yeah, I mean, our thoughts create our world, as we understand it.
Right.
It's that old thing, right? If you interviewed 10 people who saw a traffic accident, you'll get 10 different stories as to what actually happened, right? And so it just goes to show you that our thoughts and how we characterize things create how we see things and how we think about them. And
well,
stuff.
Buddha said, basically that you can't help a bad thought coming into your head, but you can help how long it stays there. And he said, it's just a thought and it will pass. Everything passes.
Right. One of the things that I teach in thought coaching is that pretty much that is that recognize that a thought is a thought and it may or may not be accurate. And that by understanding that a thought is a thought, it creates the situation where now we have a choice of whether we're going to act on that thought or not. And that's, to me, the miracle of spiritual growth is the increase in choices that we get to make, right? So if we deny the existence of a thought or just automatically assume that a thought is true without, trying to assess it and realize that maybe it is, maybe it's not, I have a decision to make here, you end up getting controlled, right? It's like the rage came over somebody, right? And it just controlled them, rather than if they had said, I mean, my wife's in the hospital and I told the nurse, I said, I may look calm, but I'm really angry about, something that's going on here that's not right, and it's going to get fixed, or I'm going to bring in the state.
Yeah.
And you know, and you need to stay in between me and this person, because I'm choosing not to act on my anger right now, but it's there.
Right. Right. You
You know,
recognized it.
and
Recognized it.
and she said, you know, just let me see what I can do. And the next thing is she comes back and she says, it's all resolved the way you want it. I said, thank you.
Yeah.
Give her a big hug, all that. But I recognized that acting on my anger was not going to get me what I wanted.
Correct.
And,
Yep.
and
You handled it right.
You know, so that's, but I acknowledged that I was angry.
Right.
You know, so I said, I'm having angry thoughts. I'm angry about this. I'm not going to act on it, other than if this person doesn't do the right thing, I will file a complaint with the state. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. While you're using your power, threatening to use your power.
Yeah.
Yeah. You weren't helpless.
Yeah. And so, I mean, but it's so freeing. I mean, it really is. I mean, freedom is the ability to know what our thoughts are and to be able to choose which ones we want to act on or not.
That's right.
You know, and that's
yeah. I teach. I volunteered to teach some classes to a bunch of drug addicts and alcoholics who were in recovery in this wonderful program that we have here in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
And I teach a class in emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And anger management is
there you go.
It's very basic, and
yeah.
that's something that a lot of these people, a lot of people have a lot of trouble with. Even if you're not hitting somebody, you're hitting them with your words.
Yeah, and you know, the presenting the idea that there is a choice as to whether or not to act on anger.
Right.
Is just you know, for somebody to hear those words could potentially be very healing. You know, it's like,
that's right.
And it's like, because I mean, at the end of the day, who doesn't want to have more freedom? Right.
Right.
And but we have to exercise that freedom to be able to benefit from it, and realize that we have it, that, you know, yes, I'm free to act on this, accept this thought as being accurate or reject it as being inaccurate, act on it or not act on it. I am free to make those choices. And
that's right.
Choices are going to have a really big impact in my life.
That's right. Yep.
Well, this has been wonderful. I really enjoyed, you know, sharing with you and getting to know you. And I think, you know, I will say that there is a quality of peaceful acceptance about you that comes across that is, to me, a real validating thing. I mean, I trust people who are come from a more peaceful centered state. It's easier for me to trust them. I was doing one of my many activities is I'm a mortgage broker, and this attorney was referring business to me. And I said, you know, maybe I'm going to regret asking this question, but why do you refer business to me? He said to me, he says, you're the only mortgage broker I've ever met that's calm.
Right.
You know, and so like being at peace with the whole situation and being calm really does inspire confidence. And
right. You put things in perspective. They're only but so important in the big scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's important. As long as you're acting with integrity.
Yeah.
You know, then you're acting from strength and peace.
Yeah. And, you know, and that's, you just tell people how it is. And, you know, I always say, one of my things is I say, I want to tell the truth with all the kindness I can muster.
Right.
You know, because you can use the truth as like a bludgeon, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and it's like, that's don't do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're all on a spiritual journey. It's all fascinating. And I just encourage people to think out of the box. You know, there's a huge spiritual awakening happening here. You don't realize it because all the news is awful and you just think the world is going to hell. But there are many, many people who are becoming enlightened on this planet, more and more all the time. But you have to be open to it and you have to look for it. you know, you might get lucky and have a beam come and hit you and have a near-death experience and, you know, change yourself that way. But most of us have to work at it, you know.
I mean, people come to it different ways. I had one of my clients call me up and say that he just had a heart attack and major heart surgery, and his cardiologist told him that he needed to start meditating and start doing yoga. And he said, he called me, he says, "You're the only guy I know that does that stuff."
Yeah, right.
I said, "Okay, yeah, no, I'll hook you up, you know. I'm not going to teach you that stuff, but I know where you can go to learn all that stuff."
Right.
You know, but that understanding of listening to yourself and being open to new ways of behaving, you know, it's filtering into people in all kinds of ways that I wouldn't have expected. I would never have expected a heart surgeon to tell his patient that what he needed to do was to start meditating and doing yoga. I mean, usually they say, you know, cut down on your cholesterol or something.
Take a pill.
You know?
Yeah.
But this doctor, that's not what he was
Yeah.
telling.
Well, the medical establishment has been slow recognizing the spiritual healing qualities, the healing qualities of being more spiritual. But I think more and more are coming around.
Yeah.
You know, drugs aren't the go-to for everything.
No, I mean, I just wrote a blog the other day that basically said that we create every disease we have, and we have the ability to heal every disease that we have, and that focusing on mitigating the symptoms can be useful because it buys us time to address the cause. But if we don't address the cause, symptoms are going to continue to show up one way or another.
Yeah.
And just, you know, taking a pill to mitigate the cause is not going to, you know, then you're playing whack-a-mole, right? It's going to pop
That's
up
right.
somewhere else. But
Yeah.
you know, but you know, it's interesting, you know, I mean, when you look at it, right, it's just like Great Britain in the colonization, right? The insurance companies are hurting themselves by dictating what doctors can do. And they basically say, we're not going to insure you unless you follow the protocols that we give you.
Yeah.
And those protocols are resulting in worse health for people, which is resulting in lower profits for the insurance company.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're having a hard time finding their way out of that and realizing that, you know, they do a couple things. You get free gym memberships with Medicare and, you know, that kind of stuff, but they're not really, they're basically telling the doctors that what protocols they have to use.
Yeah.
In order to be insured. And it's like, I don't think that's a good idea. You know?
Yeah.
But that's what's going on, you know.
Yeah, our health system is in tremendous need of reform and all over the place.
We end up, you know, going to doctors that don't take insurance in a lot of cases because the protocols that they have are not the ones that are stipulated by the insurance companies.
Right.
So, you know. Anyway, it's been wonderful to chat with you. I know are all your books on Amazon?
Yes, I have 3 on Amazon. The third is very different from the first. The first is called Jefferson's Godfather. It's a biography of founding father George Wythe, who was the most influential teacher in American history. The second is the metaphysical Thomas Jefferson, what he would say about our government and other institutions today. And then the third is totally different. And I started writing this after my husband died. It's called Of Love and Loss, A Journey of the Heart. And these are, I call them reflections because people don't like to read poems. You know, if I said it was a book of poems, nobody'd read it. So there are reflections that I wrote after my husband died about dealing with grief, learning to live mindfully, learning to enjoy each of our 5 senses. And, you know, looking for love again, you know. So I went online and looked for love and I found it. So there's a
Well,
little bit of that in there too. It has a
good for
happy
you.
ending.
Good for
Yeah, and I was not particularly a spring chicken either.
good for you.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. That's great. And I'll do my little thing for me. I've got 13 books that are on Amazon, some of which I've related to in the course of our discussion, but they all have the commonality of some aspect of spiritual growth and my stories and experiences that I hope will help people relate to and be inspired to finding greater peace and self-acceptance and strength and energy and resourcefulness and all of what I call the divine qualities.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
you're a light giver, and we need more light givers.
Yeah. So
So
my message is that everybody has all of the divine qualities within them. We just need to help one another uncover them. So
very true.
we can recognize what's already, we don't have to create peace. We don't have to create wealth. We don't have to create any of that stuff. We already are. We already have all of that as part of us, but we do need to recognize and accept it and align with it. So anyway, that's wonderful. Is there anything you'd like to say before we could wrap this up?
Well, don't be afraid to think out of the box, go where other people don't go. It's exciting. It's interesting.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, listen, thank you very much. This has really been very enjoyable, and
Thank you, Scott, and wish you all the best in your endeavors. Sounds like you're doing a lot of good work.
we're all doing what we can, so that's good.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Take care. Bye. Okay. All right. So I ended the recording, so now it's just us talking. But yeah, no, I mean, I this was fun. I enjoyed this.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to me to connect with more and more people that are making their contribution to the world and bringing more awareness of the light to the world. And it's one of the things that I've gotten in meditation is that as long as there's one person that hasn't turned their back on the light, it's like the game's not over.
That's right. Yeah, if you can just influence one person a month,
Yeah.
For the better, you're ahead of the game.
So I'm in Toastmasters, so I get to speak a fair amount at Toastmasters and
Yeah,
spoken at some graduations and some corporate events and stuff. So a little
that's
bit here
good.
and there, but I they one of the speeches I was inspired to make at one point was looking back on my life and the impact that I'd had on the world and stuff and how that all came about. And what I was inspired to understand is that kind of what I alluded to earlier was that the best thing I could do for the world is work on myself and to be an example of self-acceptance and kindness and all the divine qualities that exist within all of us and
Right.
help bring that out in myself. And that I've had some interesting experiences that I was able to bring enough of I'm going to use the word vibration. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but enough acceptance to the conversation that people had cathartic releases as they were able to find greater acceptance within themselves and share, right. And what was there, and that has always been very rewarding and validating for me,
Sure.
And I like to be able to do more of that,
Yeah.
It's all so I'm like I say on that book that I wrote, Empathetic Healing, or I never write a book I feel I don't need to read, that's why I write the book, because I need to read it, and I meditate and I work with my angels and inspiration and stuff. But what I really learned and is that acceptance is healing, and it just is, and that listening well as a form of acceptance.
Right. Yeah. And what you said about negativity making us ill, that's so true.
Yeah, we have the power, right? And it's like you don't go to the hospital to get better, you go to the hospital to mitigate symptoms.
Right.
Because there is no I mean, if you want to see a minister, in some cases they'll, if you wait long enough, one will show up. But there's no real focus on eliminating the cause of the disease.
Yeah.
Because it's in our thoughts and how we think, because our thinking drives our behavior, right? I mean, my dad had an accountant at one point where he was just tremendously obese, and he had a heart attack, and the doctor told him, look, you got to change your diet and everything. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I understand that it's going to cut my life short. That's just how it is, So it was like, there are people that need support and help, understanding that they're entertaining self-destructive thoughts that are hurting themselves.
Yeah.
And those self-destructive thoughts are not even accurate thoughts.
That's right.
And once they can get to a point where they can understand that their self-destructive thoughts are inaccurate, then there's freedom. Then there's freedom to have a different thought and a different choice.
Right.
And so that's my little thought coaching business that I've got going.
Sure. Well, it sounds like you're a big light giver out there.
I try, I mean, I have to say a lot of times I'm like, frustrated that my audience is as small as it seems to be, and I keep telling myself, well, as I continue to accept more and more of my value, it will be reflected back to me. So obviously I have more work to do in cleaning up my own thinking.
Yeah. Well, I've accepted that I'll probably never be a national figure, but I can do my part here in one city. Have an influence on a smaller number of people, and that's fine.
And who knows what reach someone who you inspire, what reach they may have.
That exactly.
So that's one of the things I think about. It's like, well, I have a small audience, but if there's one person in the audience that could make a big difference, and I can influence that one person, then okay, that's
right.
In some ways, I would prefer somebody else have all the notary. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Have the notary of bringing light to the world in a international, visible way, because people that tend to do that tend to get assassinated.
Well, you may be discovered after you die too. People might say, "Oh, he wrote some great books. You should read these books."
Yes, that's what a friend of mine says, and I go, well, yeah, but I'd really kind of like it to be while I was alive.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've learned is that you are eternal. Once you have a book up there, it goes on forever if you're on Amazon.
Yeah.
And same with if you've done a painting or podcast, your podcast is up there forever, I think. Somewhere.
Well, at least as long as I pay the $20 a month.
Right. But I don't know how YouTube works, but
I put stuff on YouTube years ago, and it's still there.
Yeah, some of my interviews are still on YouTube from a number of years ago. I don't know how it gets up there, but somehow.
Well, I'm going to try and post this to YouTube, and
Yeah. Well, think of a real jazzy title for it. That's important. Really jazzy title.
Well, maybe you could help with that. You can email me later in case you get an inspiration about it.
Okay.
And if you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I'll accept whatever help is out there in marketing, because obviously I need help there.
Yeah. Well, there are people, who you have to be careful who you hire, because there's so many people out there who claim they're experts in marketing.
Yeah.
Not going to help you.
Yeah.
I made the mistake of paying somebody to do a book review for me.